Adding to the excitement of getting a new hospital in Moose Jaw is the fact that the community was invited to take part in designing the facility. One of the people involved was Doug Meisner.
After seeing what they're going to be doing with this, people will be amazed at what the difference is as the way this hospital will operate in comparison to what it has been.
Meisner was brought on board to provide a patient's perspective. He went through the healthcare system after suffering a heart attack and believes applying some common sense will make it better for everyone.
It's not a hospital they're designing here. It actually comes down to a whole new way of bringing medical treatment to people, changing the medical system totally, and the hospital is just part of that entire change.
There was a group of people that tried to paint a picture of how our system works right now. They did something called a value stream map, which just basically paints a picture of how service is delivered to a patient, right from when they walk in the door until they're able to leave.
So I was part of the data collection team. What we did was spend a couple of weeks prior to the 3P event actually doing some of the data collection. So we would spend a day following different patients around in the hospital. What we were doing there was just really recording how much time did that patient spend on things like waiting, sitting in a waiting room, sitting waiting to check in and admitting, sitting waiting for the x-ray technician to come and get them, those types of things, versus how much time did they spend on things like actually getting their x-ray done or things that were actually part of their appointments.
The purpose of that is just to paint a picture of how it works right now. Before we can design how we want it to be, we want to really understand how it works. We spent some time learning about some of the ideas that we wanted to include in how our facility was designed. So we looked at how patients will move in our space. We looked at how the people that deliver service, the providers, how they'll be able to move and flow in their space. And then we looked at how supplies move in and out of that area. And you wouldn't believe how many supplies actually go into running a hospital.
Although we always put the patient first, we don't always focus on simple things like how many steps does a patient walk to get from A to B, who stocks the stock room, and how many steps does that person have, and how do we make that flow better. It makes you start thinking, well, you can't just think of one thing, you have to think of three things. And just as you think you've got something right, you see how it messes something else up. So you have to rethink the process. It has created that need for networking and the need for collaboration and discussion.
We want to redesign how we actually deliver service to patients, to have them at the center of everything that we do. And that's something that we're just learning how to do really well. We used fishbone diagrams here was to understand all of the components that it takes to deliver a service. All of the equipment, all of the supplies, and the providers to be able to deliver that service.
The fishbone diagram is designed to capture the whole process of patient from the time they get scheduled in the operating room by the OR schedulers, the registration, then their movement and all the processes, the people, and the methodologies that we use and the materials used in order to provide them that one surgery in that day.
What I found to be really valuable about the fishbone diagrams was that it allowed you to kind of track that process, same kind of process that we did for the value stream maps, but add a different level of detail to it. By the end of it, you start to really gain a sense of understanding better, okay, there's a lot of repeat work in a couple of these things. So the teams were divided up beforehand, so it was a pretty intentional process, and it was really intentional to make sure that we had a good assembly of people that weren't just from one particular area.
So we had a team that was looking at diagnostic imaging, a team that was looking at the universal care unit, and a team that was looking at the operating rooms. So we really tried to have a mix of people on each team, not just the people that work in that particular area, but all the people that serve that area as well, because they really have a different perspective on the way that things should be laid out. So when we talk about the flow of supplies, for example, it's so important to have people from maintenance and housekeeping being able to have a hand in how that space gets laid out, because their concerns for that area are really important. The adjacencies exercise was a really important part of the week, and with adjacencies, all we're talking about is who lives next to each other, what departments are right beside each other, right from the whole main floor of the hospital. That's the space we were looking at, and trying to decide how do we best lay this out to meet our patients' needs, and how the people that work in that facility, how they move throughout the facility. What you're working with is just a drawing. That really doesn't give you a good perspective of space and how things actually move. But when you move into 3D models, both 3D models of the whole space, but then some of the big room mock-ups you see behind us here, that really takes it to a whole other level. What that allows us to see is how do our ideas translate into reality. So in the room behind us, for example, this is an emergency suite, emergency room in the universal care unit. Designing that helped us understand, okay, how does the bed actually fit into this space, and how will we actually deliver supplies into here? Where will their family sit in this space? How will we lay that out? And so the process of building life-size mock-ups helps us to really understand how that space will actually get used.
What is the option for a parent bed? Like, that's where I stay, that's where I sit, that's where I sleep, that's where I eat. Looked at the different sizes, and I was able to go into that room and go, well, here's our different options that you've just showed me. Here's what's going to sit, and then have a nurse go with me. Well, you know, if you have that sitting there, that's going to block my thing. And so it was nice to collaborate for all of us to go, oh, you know, yeah, we can put this, so this one works best.
I can see traffic increasing just because of
a new building,
a brand new building, modern facilities,
modern equipment,
and easy to get.
You bring together all of the people who will use the facility to design the facility themselves. One of the great things about the way the week works is there's this continual process of designing and then reporting back to the group. It's not just that this little group gets in their space and thinks about just themselves. They're always having to report back to the group, and so the bigger group always has a chance to feed back into their idea. And not only that, but after this week, the things that we've designed here will go to the staff in the hospital, and they'll have a chance to feed into that process. And all of that feedback then will go to our architects to put all those ideas into drawings to bring back to us.
I don't think there's one individual person here who has been a specific influence or who has directed this event. Not one person's decisions have impacted someone else's decisions. I think everyone's decisions have impacted everyone, and it's been a complete team effort.
One of the very first things that we did, which I think was intended to set the tone for the week, was we read through a whole group of patient comments about what their experience was like. That ranged from really positive experiences to some that really could have been improved.
And so they had a couple of different sheets of paper with just anonymous feedback from different patients that they gave at the end of their visit or experience with our hospital.
Nicer and brighter rooms. I think the environment where you are put in is very important to your healing.
I think my big takeaway from the week has to do with the process that we went through. The first couple of days it felt like, I don't know if this is going to work. There was lots of doubt. It was pretty tough treading, and by the end of it you kind of saw the brilliance in the process. So quickly we want to get to that finish line, and we want to know what the finish line looks like. We just want to go from where we are right to that finish line, and we don't want to have to do all of the potentially difficult steps in between the here and the there, and really that's where the great learning, the great collaboration, the trust is built, all that kind of stuff. So for us, this isn't just about building a hospital, this is also about developing and building a culture that's going to also feed into that new hospital and ultimately shape how we provide better healthcare as well. So that's the part for me, the takeaway that I really love, is that it wasn't just about designing a room, it was also about developing relationships and building a culture here that's going to propel us.
We looked at things like how patients flow, how supplies would move. Was the space expandable? So if our needs increase, will we be able to expand this space really easily? How staff would move? Whether things could be kept confidential in that space. So they came up with a list of criteria that they would evaluate their ideas against once they started to draw them out. And throughout this process, they've been able to keep those ideas in mind and keep checking back as they've designed their spaces. Have we met that criteria? And that helps us really make sure that we're keeping the main things the main things.
There's been a fair amount of flexibility take place at the administrative level, I would say, to approach completion in the areas I'm working on. There's been some space trading, and I think they're getting to a design that the people who work in those areas are extremely appreciative of. I think there's a lot of resistance in how things could work, and that resistance seems to have fallen away a lot in this week to come to more ideal patterns for the people that work in those areas. That's nothing but good, and I think that's what this process is for.
In a traditional approach to building design, the architect leads the design, typically consulting with a select handful of hospital leaders. Options get drawn up with very little innovative thinking, typically resulting in a design that meets the preferences and experiences of the small group who provided input. This pushes an optimization of the parts and results in a siloed approach. In lean-led hospital design, the focus is on processes that add value for the patient. Multidisciplinary teams carefully examine how work is performed today and where improvements can be made for the future. Current processes are mapped in order to identify waste or non-value added components to the way in which care is delivered. Overturning preconceived notions about the way it's always been done promotes a vision of how the hospital can best deliver value to the patient. The building design is then established to support the care processes of the future. Integrated care teams focus on processes that pull value to the patient to improve safety and satisfaction while reducing operating costs and patient care cycle times. Design and operational processes are planned to eliminate waste, duplication, travel distances, and waiting time, adding value and efficiency to the patient experience. By marrying lean process design with lean facility design, healthcare administrators can achieve the value proposition of improved quality care at a lower cost.